By the way, when I do virtual keynotes, I like them to be interactive. So feel free. I can see the chat as they come in. Shout out to Lisa from Texas. Nolan, it's good to see you in the room as well. But yeah, feel free to drop in your comments, your thoughts, any of those kind of things. I will probably touch on it depending on what's coming up. So just a heads up. It is a I have things to share with you, but I also would love to hear from you as well virtually. Okay. And I also want to let you know, I do want to recognize that I am speaking to you on the lands of the Shoshone and Bannock tribes. This is Native American Heritage Month in the United States, even though, indigenous folks are indigenous every day. But I do want to recognize that I am speaking to you on the lands. I am in here in Idaho, representing the 0.8% of Black people in this state. So I try to hold it down as much as I can. I'm going to share my screen so you can see that as well. Okay. Again, I'm excited and I'm very honored to be able to present to you some of my journey, some of the things I've dealt with personally, and some my math experience, I guess. And so should be fun. So again, feel free to drop in any chat, any comments. I will have some questions I'm going to ask you as well, so feel free to answer those via chat as well. Okay, there we go. First question that I have, and I want you to think about this, is how can we make math memorable? Okay. How can we make math memorable? I'm going to share a little story. But before I share that story, I want to sing a song to you. Is that okay? I hope that's okay. Okay. Now, if you're teaching algebra out there, you might recognize this. And if you don't teach algebra, you might recognize this as well. But I can tell you, I want to sing a little song for you. Okay, here it goes. Let me clear my throat real quick. Here we go. X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Yes, right. Learn that song in ninth grade algebra. I'll be honest. Growing up as a student, I was an okay student. I wasn't like a stellar honors kind of thing. That wasn't my bread and butter. However, math was always the hardest subject for me. I'll be honest. So, I've taught, and I spent 7 years in the classroom teaching history. Stayed away from math as much as possible. So I was a history teacher. However, I remember this song to this day from my ninth grade year. I was 14 years old. And that's over 20 years ago. Yet I can sing the song. X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, the question that I want to throw out to you is, why is it that even though a person who struggled in math, and I'll share some more stories about my math journey. However, how is it that someone can remember a song and a formula like that? Now, I probably couldn't even solve, like you gave, like I got to plug, if I had to plug in the numbers and all that stuff with the formula, I probably would still struggle with that. However, no one wants me to sing the song for the whole hour. I can't sing it for the whole hour. But however, I always think about how kids can learn certain, verses, they learn songs, they learn all these things, and they can relate it to the concepts. So when we think about how do we make math memorable for our students, we have to remember things that our students can resonate with. Now, I'm not a big nursery rhyme person, but I knew the nursery rhyme, right? And so when we think about TikTok, when we think about Instagram, and a lot of our kids are on TikTok, and it seems like especially my daughter's 11, and she's constantly watching something or telling me about the latest trend or latest dance. And when we think about how formulas are so important, if we were to utilize those things, the memories, again, 20 plus years later, how many of our students would be able to sing these songs? Maybe there was an experience that you had as an educator, as a student rather, and you were in class and you learned some formulas, right? You learn the formula, and maybe it was through song, or maybe it was through some other word association strategy. And to this day, you're able to do that. So here's some questions I want you to consider. And you can feel free to pop your answer in the chat box as well. As soon as I find my mouse, there it is. Question is, instead of nursery rhymes, what songs could I use to help students connect with formulas? Okay, maybe it's not formulas. Maybe it's just multiplication tables. Maybe it's some simple addition, equations, things like that. But what if I went beyond the nursery rhymes and I found something that was trending? So for my second question is, even if trending songs are not my thing, right? So let's just say, you know what? I stick to the nursery rhymes. It's easier. It's what's familiar to me. Even if you say, you know what, trending songs is not my thing, and I don't stay up on the latest this and that. But guess who does? Right? Guess who does stay up on those things? Your kids, your students do, right? Your students pay attention to all of that. So keep that in mind as you're saying, okay, how do I help my students grasp these concepts that I want to share with them? It's relevant to me. I'm very passionate about it, but you know what? I admit to some of my kids, math is just not something that they're very interested in. I see someone said vocabulary. That is definitely a good resource to use as well. Opposite, I prefer to use opposite B. I don't know all the ins and outs. I'm not a math teacher, all right? So the ins and outs and the opposite B and all that was the way I learned it in ninth grade years ago. Okay. Now here's the next question. All right, let's shift gears just a little bit. How can we make math considerate? Okay, that's the next thing I want to bring up. Is how can we make math considerate? Okay. And I definitely agree with what Daryl says in the chat. He says that putting words and music together can use more parts of the brains. And yeah, I can definitely remember a lot of songs. Like I used to take music class. I took piano lessons and just utilizing those different things to remember scales. And it's just very helpful. So I definitely agree with all of that. I want to share a little story. If you listen to the show, Leading Equity is my podcast, episode 98, one of my favorite episodes. And the reason why it's one of my favorite episodes is my friend Nuri, as my guest, she shares a story. Now, she was from South America. She came in from Peru, and she didn't know any English. And while she didn't know any English, she was a smart girl. Right. It's just English was a barrier for her. Right. It wasn't her first language. And of course, you know how it is when you come to the United States, which always baffles me. For some reason, it's like I could speak 10 languages, but if English is not my first one, I'm looked down upon. Right. That only in the United States do we see that kind of thing. I don't know how it is in Canada, but it's like that in the United States. And she tells a story about she's in the US. She doesn't know English. And she is, every time she's in math class, she feels isolated. She feels ostracized because the teacher is teaching in English, and she felt like the teacher didn't really take the time to really assess her needs and make sure that she was being taken care of. And so every week, the teacher would call her up on front of the board, in front of the whole class, and have her do a math problem and try to have her solve it. And again, it's not that she couldn't figure these things out. It's just English was not her first language. Until one day, she shows up, teacher calls her up front, and this time the teacher has one of those Spanish English dictionaries. It's all tattered up. The teacher opens up the dictionary. It starts to say the equation in Spanish. Nuri is excited now because she's able to solve the problem. And while she's solving the problem, I mean, the teacher's staring in awe. The students are staring in awe. And it's like it's this epiphany. It's sad that it took that one little moment for the teacher to really recognize the value and being considerate of that student's needs, of Nuri's needs. It's sad that it took that long, because each week Nuri was coming up front and would have to try to figure out a problem and just couldn't understand or communicate it. But I really remember that story, and I've had well over 215 episodes. And I remember her story very vividly, her experiences that she shared with me in that podcast episode. I definitely encourage you, especially as a math teacher, to listen to her story about that math teacher that she had, who finally took the opportunity to assess, when we think about what equity means, right? So equality is, give everybody the same thing. Everybody gets the same slice of pie. But you know what? Some people have food allergies. Some people might need a larger size. Some people might need a smaller size of the pie. And that's the equity piece. When we're making sure that individual needs are being met, then we are being an equitable educator. But if we just say, you know what, because people will tell me this all the time, you know what, I just had one student. So if Nuri is the only class, or if you have a Nuri in your class, and Nuri is the only student that, English is not their first language, and so you just teach to the masses and never take the time to think about the cultural value and the understanding of, language differences. Those are some things that we don't always think about. Sometimes it's just easier. Sometimes it's just an unconscious thought. But when we say that we are practicing an equitable classroom, when we say that this is the work that we're doing, and that each and every student is important to us, that means that we're going to take the time to be considerate of our kids' needs, which leads me to a question I want you to ask yourself. And again, feel free to put your answer in the chat. Have I missed opportunities to meet the individual needs of some of my students? Have I? There's different ways that we can differentiate. And if you're not a differentiated person, and I'm an advocate of universal design for learning. But if you say, you know what, I'm going to differentiate, or this child has an IEP or have a 504 plan, but I only have one student, or I only have two students that might need some additional support, one or two is enough. There is no quote, oh, I should have had at least 40%, or I should have had 5% of my students. No, one is good enough to go the extra distance. Yes, looking at the chat, good stuff coming in, good stuff coming in. TJ says, I always ask these two questions when I look at tasks. How does this create access and equity, and how might it be marginalizing to any student? Good advice. Good advice to give. Thank you. Let's move on. How can we make math familiar? How can we make math familiar? So I shared a little bit about my ninth grade experience. I took Algebra 1, ninth grade. Again, I learned the quadratic formula. Still remember that to this day. I can't tell you anything else about Algebra 1, but I can definitely tell you quadratic. So 10th grade, I moved to geometry. Now, nothing against my teacher. I actually love my teacher in 10th grade, Mr. Campbell. Awesome teacher where was he from? He was from Bermuda. So one of the few times I've had a black male teacher. And he was awesome. I felt like I had a good relationship with him. He was very friendly, nothing against him personally. However, I failed. I didn't know what was going on with geometry. And it wasn't like I wasn't trying. I was trying. Okay. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I could have tried hard. I just didn't get it. I didn't get postulates and theorems, and I just didn't understand what the heck was happening. it was literally like I was trying to learn a foreign language, a language that just was out of my purview. I just didn't know what was going on. So I failed it, 10th grade. And I ended up having to do summer school. Now, you might be saying, well, what does this have to do with familiarity? Okay. Well, hang with me. All right. I'm gonna come back. I'm gonna circle back to Mr. Campbell a little bit later on. Okay. But that was my 10th grade experience. Geometry. I had to take it 2 times. I did pass in summer school. I don't know how, but again, I was able to pass. I just didn't understand. I just did not understand. It was just foreign to me. So here's some questions I want you to ask. Okay. Or I'm going to ask you. If you have had a student not pass your class, what are some things? Why did I put that together? What are some things that you would do differently if you had them again? Raise your hand if you've ever had a student that didn't pass your class. It seems like you did everything you could, and it just didn't work out. So if you had them again, are there some things that you could do differently? I'm just going to assume that if you are here in this, as an audience member in this session, if you are here, then you care. I would imagine you care about math, right? And you are passionate about the subject and content that you're presenting. And sometimes we recognize that some of our students just don't share that same passion, right? So if you have students or have had students that, for whatever reason, they didn't excel like you wanted them to do, what are some things that you could do differently to try to produce different results? See what kind of comments I got in here. Let's see. Student not passing is a failure of the system. Education should not be about winnowing. It should be about opening opportunities. Yeah, I'm a proponent that, well, here's my next question, actually, to respond to that. Do you believe that it is up to a student to do well in your class? Is that on the student? Sometimes that's kind of where we operate. Well, kids didn't care. The students didn't put in the effort that they needed to put in, or whatever reason. We tend to blame, and when I say we, I've done it too. Okay, we tend to blame students for their own failure, for not passing. Okay, and my whole idea of I have issues with grading in general, but we put it on the kids, right? I have to admit that some of us do that, right? Student success is the focus. Yes, it's quite complicated. This is some good chat coming in. Okay, let's see what else I see. Send more grace, dig deeper to find out why, reach out to all stakeholders, reflect on my instruction. Yeah. Reflect on my instruction. My daughter came home the other day and she was telling me how all the kids, like her whole class, they failed a test. And she was telling me how, like, there was questions on the test they didn't even go over in class. They didn't even know the test was coming up. It was just all these red flags. And I was just sitting there listening to my daughter tell me about this, and I'm just thinking, you know what? This is on the teacher. Anytime you got well over 50% of your kids have failed a test or an assessment, that means you need to reteach it. And don't reteach it the same exact way. You need to try something different. But if we just say, oh, well, the kids weren't prepared. See, these kids lack discipline. These kids don't care. We put it on the students instead of really taking some self-reflection and humbling ourselves and say, you know what, maybe I could have done better myself. Okay. System fails them when they are passed on to the next grade without the skills. Yeah. The onus is on us as teachers. Yep. But I do bend over backwards to do as much as I can, and yet I don't feel it is enough. Don't beat yourself up. We do the best that we can. I believe that we do the best that we can. Unfortunately, there are some teachers that, this is just a paycheck for them. But there are some very passionate teachers, and you know what? You won't catch them all. but you're doing your best and you're going above and beyond, again, for that one student. Okay. It doesn't have to be a slew of students in order for you to go the extra mile for them. All right. Next question that I have. How can we make math real? How can we make math real? Sometimes we get stuck on, what is it, A plus B plus equals C. Oh man, I am destroying a formula. I just remember something in geometry. It was like A squared plus B squared plus C. I don't know. Someone put that in there if they know what I'm talking about. But it's like for the triangle. But if we are giving them formulas, we're Pythagorean theorem. Thank you. I'm not even embarrassed. I tell you, I'm not a math teacher, but I appreciate the Pythagorean theorem. Yes, that's what I was looking for. How do we make sure that the students can utilize that information, the content that we are learning? How can we utilize that within our daily practice? How many times has a kid told you, or have you heard, why do we need to learn this? We'll never use this in real life. How many times, right? If I had $1 for every time you hear something like that, why do we need to learn this? We don't need to learn this, right? A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Thank you. Okay. So here's the thing. Sometimes I'll have these conversations because I'm big on culture responsive teaching, right? Making sure that the content is relevant. And people will call me out and they'll say, you know what, Sheldon, that's all fine and dandy. If I'm a history teacher or if I'm a social studies teacher or language arts, writing, I could be culturally responsive in that sense, but I can't do that in math. How do I present math, which is mainly formulas and equations? How do I present that in a culturally responsive way? And I love this question because if this is a new concept to me, if this is not, if it goes against what I was taught through teacher school, whatever it is, right? As I was preparing to be a teacher, my candidacy was there. And I'm trying to figure out, well, how do I make sure that what I am teaching is relevant to the kids and I can be culturally responsive? Does that mean I need to find a mathematician of color and teach a lesson on that? Here's what I say. What is one of the things that we utilize as math teachers? What do we utilize a lot on a daily basis? Is word problems, right? So when we have those word problems, though, often those word problems are from a bank, right? From just, maybe it's from the textbook or something like that, but it's from a bank of questions. So here's some things I want you to think about or consider. Social justice math. How can I utilize a word problem? I can create a word problem. And if you're in a math department where there's several of you and you have PLCs, you get together, this could be an opportunity for you to learn or can create word problems that are relevant, again, and real to your students. Here's an example I got from francissharper.com. Okay. Here's an example. It costs $1.50 to travel each way on the city bus. A Transit City Fast Pass costs $65 a month. Which is the more economical way to get to work, the daily fare or the Fast Pass? Now, again, this is a broad question, but think about how you could tweak questions like this to relate to your community, your city, the community that you're serving. We want to create questions that are relevant to your students. Now, I'm going to throw a caveat out with that. Okay. This is not an opportunity to utilize stereotypes as a basis for your word problems. Okay. For example, if you said, Jamal's dad, Ray, is incarcerated and was supposed to do 10 years for armed robbery, but he only did 5 years. How many years did he spend in prison? That's probably not a question you want to ask. Okay, so we want to avoid stereotypes when it comes to how we present word problems. However, again, there's other topics, right? You could talk about medicine and insurance, health insurance. You can ask questions regarding mass incarceration, gentrification. There's a new Starbucks that's being constructed in your neighborhood. It's going to cost X amount of money to demolish the building that's already there to build this new Starbucks. You could ask these type of questions to your students. You could discuss college tuition costs, voter turnout, environmental issues, crime rates, federally owned land, poverty rates, and systemic issues. But when you utilize relevant content, okay, when you utilize questions that students can identify with. Johnny wants a new pair of Jordans. Jordans cost $190. Retro ones, $190. That's way too much for some retro ones, by the way. And he has $200 and plus tax. How much would he need to pay? Is he short or does he have enough money? If tax is 7%. These simple questions that you can ask. Again, kids will identify with that. Right? Now, Carol says we need to make sure, however, that creating culture relevant, we do not squeeze a learner out of global thinking and exposure. I agree with that. Yeah. It doesn't necessarily have to pertain to just your community, right? We can talk about world systems, challenges that are happening outside of the neighborhood. I totally agree with that. Yep. At the end of the day, you need to know your community. And when I say know your community, I mean actually know your community. Don't rely on stereotypes and assumptions to create these experiences for your students. Okay. So some questions that I want you to think about. In what ways can I introduce real life situations into my class? Let me while it's on my mind. Kids are living real life. I want to be clear about that. Kids are like, this is real life. School is part of real life. So maybe real life isn't the best use. We could reframe it with, how do we make sure that we are utilizing real everyday experiences? Or maybe sometimes I think when we say real life, we say kind of make it seem like as if school is not part of what folks are dealing with, or kids are dealing with. And I don't want that to be the case, right? But how do we utilize content or questions or information that our students can identify with? It resonates with them. Okay. Cultural and societal context. I like that answer. Good job. Thank you. Project-based learning. Have I used project-based learning effectively? And if you're not utilizing project-based learning, please do. Please do. You again, when we're thinking about how we can create socially just students. See, sometimes we just rely on the content, right? Oh, I'm a math teacher and I'm just here to teach math. But you still have human beings in your classroom. You still have people in your classroom who are dealing with a pandemic. You have children in your classroom who might have some financial instability. Maybe their parents lost a job, or they're on the verge of losing a job. It's just, like, we don't know. When we think about the type of situations that we know and that we don't know when it comes to our families and what they're dealing with. Okay. So I definitely encourage you to utilize project-based learning and utilizing it effectively. Okay. And I agree with that too. Yeah, students can create questions as well, right? Good answer. This is good feedback. Okay. Next question that I have for you. How can we make math emotional? Now, I'm not saying that we need to make math crying moments. I don't, that's not what I mean. But how do we make it emotional? Okay. Here's something I want to share with you. Remember Mr. Campbell from 10th grade? So, senior year, guess who I had again as my math teacher for my senior year? Good old Mr. Campbell. Again, I love Mr. Campbell. He's you know what, believe us or not, he is top 5, one of my favorite teachers. And keep in mind, math was not my favorite subject. It was actually my least favorite subject in school. Yet one of my favorite teachers was one of my math teachers. Go figure. They sometimes say when it comes to relationships or a student's experience in passion or the way a student might feel about a subject that they have taken in class often comes from the way that relationship and the content was presented by that teacher. I had Mr. Campbell senior year. He remembered me. I failed his class the first time I took geometry. Now, senior year, I had to take what is called integrated math. Okay. So it was like broken up into 3 parts. There was algebra 1, geometry, and then algebra 2. That was what we learned, or it was more of maybe an enrichment type of course. It wasn't a remedial math, but it was a math where it's like, okay, you've learned these 3 subjects and we're just going to remind you as a refresher, and then you take a test at the end. All that school year, I struggled. This time, I did tutoring. I had a good friend, buddy of mine, that did a lot of tutoring for me. We spent a lot of time. He helped me out, and I was passing enough. Probably had a C. I was close. It was borderline. Senior year. This is not, in some schools and some states, they kind of just pass you up, but you got to hit those credits in order to graduate. I sat there last day, final exam. Okay. Now the final exam was comprehensive. When I tell you I studied all night long the night before, probably the week, because I wanted to graduate from high school. I did not want to be a 5th senior, super senior, none of that. I didn't want no summer school. I didn't want none of that stuff. I wanted to be done. I was done with school. Yeah, it is. I did all the tutoring. I did all the studying. I felt prepared. Again, enough to pass. I remember going to class. I get all, he's passing out the papers. Mr. Campbell's passing out the tests. Final exam, comprehensive. I remember literally looking at that paper. Question number 1. Had no idea what to do. I was one of those kind of people that when I would sit there, like if the teacher's teaching a math question and I would just be following along. Yeah. And then he's going to do this and he's going to do that. And this is how you solve it. And I'll just be following along with the teacher. But as soon as I get asked to do a question on my own, okay, guys, do number 3 by yourself. I would sit there and watch and be like, I don't even know where to start. And don't let something like one variable be different, just a little bit of it's not the exact same problem, but it's like just a different equation, but the same, concepts and rules. Shoot, I'm really struggling. So I'm looking down at this paper. This is final exam. I need to pass this test in order to graduate from high school. All my other classes are fine. It's just the math class. Okay, all right, maybe I can't do number 1, But, I could probably do number two. So I look at number two. What the hell is this? I don't even know what this is. Is this? I don't remember learning any of this stuff. I'm darn sure for some reason I studied. I don't know what's going on. I looked at number three, number four, number five. I am sitting there with a blank stare. I swear I'm this is a different language. Is this hieroglyphics? I don't know what this is. I'm fighting back emotions. I'm trying not to cry because I said, this is it. I am going to fail my senior year of school to this test. And the thing about it, like I said, I tried. I studied. I spent hours and hours going over practice problems, going over all the different things that I needed to know in order to make sure that I didn't fail this test. You know what I did? I sat there for, I think the class was about an hour, and I sat there, watch all my other classmates finish up their test. You can turn your test in, you can leave. I'm the last one in there. I turned my test over with the last 10 minutes or so of class, and I wrote my teacher a letter. I said, "Dear Mr. Campbell, please, I'm sorry. I tried. I have studied. I've spent hours and hours and hours trying to prepare for this test. I don't know what to do. This is my senior year. And I really want you to look in your heart. Please don't let me fail. Sincerely, Sheldon." I literally wrote my teacher a letter. I turned it in. Worried all day, all next day. And we get the notification whether or not you're going to graduate. You can march. Mr. Campbell passed me. I'll never forget that. Math is not my strongest subject. It's not my favorite. It's my least favorite subject. But like I said, who's in my top five? If someone asks me who are your favorite teachers, Mr. Campbell's there. You know why Mr. Campbell was there? Mr. Campbell had grace. Here's a question I want you to ask yourself. I didn't have a pandemic going on. Wasn't no COVID-19 when I was 17, 16 years old. Just a regular dude, student, trying to figure life out in my teenage years. Fast forward 2021. What do we have? We have a pandemic going on. And like I said, we have families that are dealing with some stuff. You have kids, students that are dealing with some stuff that you don't even know about. Sometimes we say, you know what? Well, Johnny was behind in math before we even had, before our schools closed in back, 2020, back in March. And now Johnny's way behind. Or we have folks that'll say, well, these kids never logged into their class, or I never saw them on Zoom, or they aren't trying. They don't care. And you got some kids that are trying. You got some kids that do care. But you know what? School is not a priority for them because they have life, other things in their life that are impacting them that we just don't know about. So the question is, how can I show grace to my students? What are some things I could do Monday that shows, you know what, this is not just a math class in which I expect you to pass with an A academically, but I want you to be successful as a human being. We're people. We have emotions. We deal with stuff every day. How can we show that to our students? Yeah. Yeah, can't forget about the parents. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, parents. And how does that impact the kids? Right? A parent is stressed out. Maybe they take it out on the student. Maybe the child has to do extra, they have to step up. There's more responsibility that they have in order to contribute to the family. When we think about cultural differences and how parents and the child dynamic is not the same in every household. Okay. Just something I want you to consider. The idea of grace. Mr. Campbell did not have to pass me. He could have just said, you know what? Sheldon didn't try. I've seen Sheldon all year. I remember him in the 10th grade. He's a slacker. He could have that mindset. I wasn't the most articulate in my letter. I begged him. I asked him, please pass me. I don't want to. I'm sorry. I tried. I know some of us would be like, you know what? Nope. Still going. You didn't even know. Okay, that I lost. Okay, I think we're still here. Okay.
Sheldon, you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. We dropped off. Did you drop out?
I lost you, and it said the recording stopped.
Okay,
but I don't
think
know.
Everybody's still here, and we'll get the recording. It's recorded again. I think we lost a connection here just for a moment. But is everything okay? Can you keep going?
Oh yeah, I can keep going.
Awesome. We were worried we lost everything, but keep going. We're good.
Okay. Yeah, the folks in the chat said they didn't lose me. So I think we lost you, but it looks like everybody was still here. I was still on with everybody. So okay. Yeah, the assessment was a problem. It didn't allow Sheldon to show what he did know. Yeah. And I get that. I didn't I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything. That would have been, hey, listen, I try. I really I'm straight up. I did try that year, senior year especially, because I had already failed him. Right. I knew what I was coming into. I knew what kind of teacher it was. I knew what I was expecting. And so I double time. I put in extra work because I had already done summer school. And I didn't want to do summer school in my senior year, right? It wasn't something I wanted to do. But yeah, you're right. So again, where's the grace, right? Because some folks are like, well, he didn't get a chance to measure Sheldon. Did Sheldon master the information? Did he understand? No, I didn't. And that it was a decision that the teacher made. I'm getting distracted. Okay. Let's move on. The final piece that I want to share with you is probably the most important piece. This is a piece that is most dear to my heart. If you ever listened to the show, to the podcast, you know that I'm big on advocacy. Just you being in this session. Just you being in this session and participating, and not just this session, but this whole event, right? You are taking the time to better your educational experience, to better yourself as a professional in math. That's great. But if you are the only one, just keep in mind, your students don't just see you for the day, right? So they see you, your colleague next door, They see maybe the principal, they might see a lunchroom, they might see a bus driver. They see multiple staff members associated with your school on a daily basis. Even if you're an elementary teacher, they don't have you you're not the only person they interact with. Okay. So it's important that the work that you're doing for yourself, you don't just keep it for yourself. See, an equity advocate are folks that are willing to speak up. These are folks that are willing to challenge the status quo. Sometimes people will tell me, well, I was in a meeting and some things were said and I didn't like what was being said. And I asked them, what did you do about it? And they say, well, I was just a paraprofessional, or, this is my first year teaching, or I didn't feel it to be my place to speak up. Education and teaching is not just about the content delivery and our classroom management. It's more than that, right? Sometimes you'll have students that will come up to you and say, teacher, I feel like I'm being mistreated in my other class, or I feel like the teacher's only calling on the boys, never calling on the girls, or I feel like the questions or the content or the books that I had to read, I can't see myself within that content. Kids come to us because they trust us, right? They find value, not just, again, in the content delivery, but as mentors, as folks that, unofficial counselors were often placed in these positions. So when we are saying, you know what, I'm going to be an equity advocate, I'm going to be a person that's like, not only am I making sure that individual needs are being met, but I'm also going to support my students outside of my classroom. Here's some questions that I want you to ask yourself. If someone asked my students about what they liked best about me, would they respond with comments centered around my values of equity and inclusivity? Keep in mind, equity is not giving everybody the same thing. That's equality. Okay. Have I missed opportunities to speak up about injustices? And if you have, don't beat yourself up. I've missed opportunities myself, right? It happens. We're human and we're fallible people. Sometimes we miss these opportunities. Sometimes they catch us so off guard, we just don't know what to say or what to do. We're just not prepared. Which leads me to my last question. What could I do to prepare to respond if inequities take place? I always tell people these are learning experiences. I try not to live with regrets. I try not to even utilize the word regrets. I just view life as learning experiences. What can I take from this moment? I messed up, made a mistake, or something happened to me as a result of a choice or decisions that I have made. Rather than beating myself up about it, especially if I know that I was wrong or I missed something or someone was depending on me and I didn't come through, rather than focusing on that, how do I utilize that as a learning experience? What can I take from that? At the end of the day, you have the power to change lives. You're a person of influence. I believe we do our kids a disservice when we only focus on the content. I love schools that provide social emotional learning support, especially during these times in the pandemic, trauma-informed care, in addition to the content. If you're a staff member out there who's also an unofficial counselor, unofficial mom or dad, or guardian, if you will, if you are having other responsibilities in addition to your teaching load, sometimes it can be stressful. Sometimes it's Shoot, man, I've had some days, especially when you start to learn about your students and you start to learn about the different things that they have going on in their life, and they open up to you. Sometimes those that you take on, you feel like you're taking on that burden yourself. You're taking it on because sometimes kids will drop some heavy stuff on you. But best believe 10 years from now, 20 years from now, even if you were their teacher and your sub and math wasn't their favorite subject, I bet you're going to impact a lot of students' lives. And that's the power that we have. Don't forget about that. That's all I have for you for today. Feel free to connect with me if you have some additional questions. I always encourage you to subscribe to the podcast. There's all my social information, and I want to bring your attention. I have a book coming up. Never thought I would write a book, but I do have a book coming up, fall of 2022.
Congratulations! What an undertaking that must be.
Man, listen, that was yeah. That's a story in itself, but I'm thankful for that opportunity. I have a resource. I'm just going to drop a link in here real quick. There's a link. If I have a resource, a freebie, it's basically 10 steps towards leading equity, just to get you started. I don't like checklists. I don't like check boxes. It's just more of just some 10 things to think about as an equity advocate. If you want to click on that link there, you'll be able to get that information. And also you'll be able to learn more each week. I do a weekly newsletter called The Weekend Voice, and that will be accessible to you as well.
Awesome, Sheldon. Thanks so much for sharing your wisdom, your insights. I think that you've left us with some great questions to ask ourselves. Good kind of questions that help us shape our own teaching and our own journeys. And I think it's such an important message you shared here with the Make Math Moments community. And I want to thank you so much for joining us and sharing that message here. I know everybody here has enjoyed this session and is getting a lot out of it. And actually, that's what we want to do right now. I want you to actually pause and reflect on Sheldon's session here. I want you to think about, what is your biggest takeaway from his session? And I want you to share that in the chat. And what we're going to do is every session we are doing a draw from our sponsors. And I'm just going to randomly pick a session, or sorry, a person. I'm just going to kind of scroll through all the shares that you guys are going to do in just a moment. I'm going to point to one, and that person is going to win the draw here in this session. Every session we are giving out draws here today. But the draw here today is from one of our main 7 sponsors. We've got Brandon Camp, Corwin, Heinemann, Pearson, Math Learning Center, White Book, and Mathagon, who have sponsored this. This is why it's free for you to be here with me, with Sheldon, with the rest of the speakers and the other folks here. And in this draw, so think about your biggest takeaway about Sheldon's session, put that in there. But in this draw is from the Math Learning Center. They are giving out their number rack, and it's a great resource. They've got a number of number racks they're going to give out today and tomorrow, and we're going to give you, or they're going to send you this pack. One of you here is going to win this in this draw. So I'll take another 30 seconds here. Get your biggest takeaway from this session. Type it in there, and I'll just do a kind of a quick scroll. Unless Sheldon sees a big takeaway, he's like, "Hey, I think that was a great one," and you want to call it out, Sheldon. Feel free to do.
They're coming in fast. They're coming in fast.
Sure.
But I'm seeing some really good comments coming in.
You've got some engaging folks here, and that's the professional you are. And before we choose that, I just wanted to apologize. We did have a technical glitch over here on our end, and we lost contact. But I apologize that we had that, and it sounds like you handled that well. So sorry about that, and thanks for being such a good sport about that. So you want me to choose?
Go for it. They're coming in. You got it.
Yeah, I just do a quick scroll. I'll read it out loud. I'll read the name and then we'll write that name down and then we'll hook up a little later. We'll email you and this person and they'll get this pack from the Math Learning Center here, folks. Here we go. I'm just going to scrolling here and I'm now just going to pop. There we go. This one is from Nolan. Nolan, I'm just going to jot your name down here. Nolan Fossum. Nolan said, so helpful to hear the voice of non-math educator to broaden our perspective. I also think that's a great message there from Nolan. And this is part of the reason why we asked Sheldon to join us here, is to give us some different perspectives. So Nolan, congratulations. You have won the number rack pack in this session. We're gonna give out some more stuff later on, but thanks for the Math and Learning Center. A couple other reminders here, folks, before you head off from this session into some other sessions. The replays, this session is going to get put up in the replay area of the website. As soon as it's done processing, we'll get it up there. But remember, you can access all the replays this weekend for the whole weekend. And then they head on over to the Make Math Moments Academy. Hit us up on the link there because you get your first 30 days free, which is enough to watch a session a day or even space them out a little bit. Also, just as a reminder, certificates are going to be mailed out on Monday. You'll get some information about how to get your certificate. So thanks, everybody. Thanks so much. And Sheldon, thanks so much to you. It's been a great session, and I'm so glad you're here with us.
Thanks for having me. Take care, everyone.
Awesome. Take care, everybody. Have a great rest of the day. Check out some other sessions. We've got a couple more going on right now.